Right here, a little bit of an update on the X-Factory X5 rebuild. I found this car so interesting, in fact, that I bought another one. You may have seen this one on eBay. I was waiting for the price to come down a bit. I didn't think it was worth the original asking price because the chassis does have some blemishes, and he did drop the price, maybe not by quite as much as I would have liked, but I didn't want to wait for someone else to snatch this one up, so I figured I'd buy it. Basically, the underside of the chassis here has a big crack, and also over here, where the motor mount is, or in that space, you can even see it a bit on this side. There's a crack here, right? Look at that. So I'm not too worried about that. I think that's something that can be, fixed or patched with epoxy. So I'm going to get some epoxy and just, patch it from both sides, sand it down, and that should be good enough for a runner. This was also appealing to me because it had front and rear CVDs. Front low-C CVDs for the XX4 are really hard to find. And sure enough, much to my disappointment, even though it came with CVDs, the front CVDs have a bit of slop in the dog bone where the dog bone meets the drive pin here. And not only that, one of these holes had a little bit of a crack on the outer surface here, which allowed this pin to come loose. Because when I got this dog bone was detached from the wheel axle. So I had to try to bend that metal back into place and try to sort of seal it shut with some rosin core solder. Solder doesn't stick very well, if at all, to steel. So it was very hard just to get a little bit of solder in there. You can see that shiny part right there, just to try to seal it off. I don't know if I would necessarily use this in a runner, maybe as a spare part, because there is a bit of slop there. But I figure I could at least try to fix it. Other than that, the car is fairly complete. So, again, more for spare parts, I guess, than anything else. So I'll just put that over there. As for the actual runner, as you can see, I have basically everything built. Front and rear suspension is all set up. I tried to do the same suspension setup I have for my XX4, although it does seem to me that the front shock oil is a little light. I used 35 weight oil up front with, I think, either they're red pistons or orange pistons, can't remember. But it feels a little bit under damped for a set of blue front low-C springs. So I may put 40 weight oil up front, but otherwise identical suspension setup to the XX4 that I have. These caster blocks are in fact aluminum. I'm not 100% sure what they're from. I'm not a low-C expert. Maybe they're from some other version of the XX4. Maybe they're an aftermarket part. I don't know. But I do like them because you have two mounting options for the outer ball stud. And because it's metal, you're not going to strip it. If you want to take this out and put spacers in and screw it back in, you can keep screwing out and in as many times as you want without stripping the threads. As long as the ball stud doesn't get busted, and then it becomes really hard to take the remaining thread out. But that's a separate issue. What else did I do? I stuck with universals, front and rear, even though it did come with rear CVDs. The front CVDs it came with as well had really rusted out dog bones, and I didn't want to use those. I tried to find new dog bones. These are shiny CVD dog bones, but they're the wrong length. This is just a part that the dog bones I picked up separately, thinking they would be the correct length, but they're not. The XX4 front CVD dog bones are an 84 millimeter length, and they're basically impossible to find. So I figured universals are easier to find parts for, so I would just use those. I also did a 12 millimeter hex conversion front and rear. The 12 millimeter wheel hex up front is something you can get from Moto Obscura. It just mounts right on the same way that the low-C 10 millimeter wheel hex would mount on. It's just a 12 millimeter part, and with that you can use B64 or B74 front and rear rims, which are easy to find nowadays because that's a modern wheel. For the rear, I just used just some associated wheel hexes that slot right onto the wheel axle there. That's easy to do. I also have some Moto Obscura front and rear shock tower braces. Those mount on without any real issue. They fit nice. The only thing is for the front brace, because now you have a ball set that has to go through the thickness of the front brace plus the thickness of the plastic here for the front mounting point here, you just need a longer thread on the ball stud. And I try to have a ball stud with a long enough thread so that there's a little bit sticking out of the back, so I can put a little nut there to try to lock everything into place. But that's it. For the electronics, as you can see, I'm not done yet. I'm mounting the electronics, and I still have to put the sensor wire in, but everything's all more or less mounted. The receiver I decided to put here because I was going to put it over here, but that's a really long reach for the control wire for the speed control, and this control wire isn't quite long enough to make it all the way over here. So I figured I'd mount the receiver here, and maybe between the weight of all of this on this side and the weight of the servo and the battery on this side, that would make it a bit more equal. Receivers are very light, but you know, anything you can do, I guess, to balance the weight left and right is not a bad thing. This is a Tekin RS Pro, by the way. It fits in here just fine. There's a reasonable amount of space to fit a speed control here, but the chassis kind of tilts inward, so you are going to need something that's either long and narrow or something sort of small like this. If you have something like a Novak GTB3 or Novak Pulse, you know, those things are massive, and I love the speed controls, they're great, but they wouldn't fit here. You might have to mount it like here or something. But anyway, other things to point out, for the battery mounting, a shorty LiPo will fit in here, but you do have to modify the base for this post here. This post, basically this part here is what screws into this base. This base is part of the molding for the chassis. So I have to get a Dremel and grind this down back to the post on both sides here so that the shorty can slot right in. If you keep these here, there's not quite enough space for it to fit. So you just got to grind those back. Once that's done, I think it'll be all set. Nothing really special going on with the rear. This whole assembly here is just basically ported from the X-4. I guess the only modification you have to make is for the rear bulkhead slash shock tower. There is some dremeling you have to do, I think, on the inside to get this to slot in to the X-5 assembly here. So if you just get a Losi X-4 new in package rear bulkhead, it won't just fit straight on. You have to do some carving with a Dremel. Okay. Let's see. I think that kind of covers it. Oh, right. One thing I did want to mention is that this opening here for the motor is massive. And I'm not too crazy about that, right? You can get a lot of dirt coming in here. You can really, you know, scratch up the motor and smack it around. So what I plan to do, I don't know exactly what material I want to use, if I'm just going to use Lexan to make it simple, or maybe like a little carbon fiber plate to just cut it to fit in here, using this screw here to hold it down. But I want to mount between the motor and the chassis, so on this side, right, under the motor, just a plate to cover that off to try to protect the motor, and to also maybe, you know, add a little bit more bracing to the chassis on this side so this part here doesn't like break and crack like you see on this chassis here, right? This one got pretty beat up over here. So if I can avoid this by adding some extra material here to sort of, you know, add some rigidity to this part of the chassis, that would be good. Okay. And then other than that, what else comes to mind? Maybe just a bit of a comment here on the Losi shocks. These build a lot like a Kyosho shock or like the Schumacher Cat 2000 or 3000 shocks, where they bleed, you fill them in and bleed them from the bottom. I still have to get used to how to do this really well on the Losi shocks. With the Kyosho shocks, what I would do is I would fill the cartridge upside down, the shock body upside down, and then screw in the assembly that has the seal and the piston and the shock shaft with the cartridge upside down, and then I screw it as far in as it'll go, and then back off a bit, and then pump the piston to bleed the oil out. And usually on the Kyosho shocks, when I do that, it works pretty well, and I don't have to worry about having like a lot of air bubbles in there. But when I try that same methodology with these low-C shocks, I find that with the same bleeding approach, I end up bleeding out too much oil. So then I have to add more oil in, and then I bleed it again, and I bleed out too much oil, and I keep going back and forth and using too much oil. Maybe what I need to do is, with these shocks, is after I screw it down, flip it right side up, open it up a little bit, and start bleeding the oil out by pushing the piston up. I think I tried that on the rear shocks, and it worked a bit better. These front shocks I'm going to have to redo. I want to redo them anyway because I think the oil I put in there is too light. So just a comment on low-C shocks. Again, I'm still kind of learning the vintage low-C stuff. But that's just about it for the X-5. I guess after I get everything sorted out with the body and the wing and all that, I'll make another video. So yeah, that's it for now, and thanks for watching.